Good evening. I'm Chris Alexander. I'm the associate pastor here at Countryside. How are you? Good. That's really good. It turned out to be an absolutely beautiful day out, except for the tornado warning that closed down the mall. Did you guys notice that? I went to go pay all my bills today at the mall, and it was all closed. It's really weird. So I just walked around the mall, got my steps in. So we have a terrific evening for you tonight. Precious Davis is here, yay, in the house. And I get to be the one to tell you where the restrooms are. How many of you know where the bathrooms are? All right, then you can lead the others. But for those of you who don't know, if you just go outside these doors right here and turn to your left, if you go to the end of the hallway where it dead ends and turn to your left again, the restrooms are right there. There's also an elevator around the corner if you would need it for anything, and there are restrooms downstairs if you need to go downstairs as well. When you get off of the elevators, just turn to your right and you'll be right there. We welcome you on behalf of Countryside and on behalf of Jesus Christ, but all of the faith communities that we're a part of as the Tri-Faith. We have Rabbi Azrael, who is here as our resident scholar, so we're happy to have him here and representing our Jewish brothers and sisters. We also are partners with American Muslim Institute, and together the three of us make up the Tri-Faith, which is located at 132nd and Pacific, right at Sterling Ridge, and we're planning on moving there within a couple years. So if you'd like to know more about that, just stick after and ask me, and I'll let you know anything you'd like to know. We also accept contributions for that, so anytime, just let me know. But mostly we are just thrilled to be able to expand our knowledge, grow who we are, grow our visions about who God is and how God works in the world and how we might participate in that. And that's what Center for Faith Studies is all about. So we're very happy that you're here. We're very happy to all those of you who are online. And Tracy, thank you for being a part of that to keep the online folks going. Say hi to everybody. And now I'd like to invite Kelly Keller, who is the director of our Center for Faith Studies, and she'll be able to tell you what's going on tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you all for being here this evening and braving tornado weather. I actually was praying for storm because there's somebody here who told me that she would be able to come if it rained. But then I thought, oh, don't pray that hard. I don't want a tornado. So I wish I had that kind of power. It is my honor tonight to introduce our guest speaker, who I've gotten to know over the last couple of days and just could sit at her feet forever. Our fall series, Who Do You Say That I Am? Conversations with the Soul, is a nod to the dialectical conversation between our image of God and our image of ourselves. In our creation story, we understand ourselves to be made in the image of God, right? Yet in our human story, it's just riddled with us trying to make all sorts of exceptions as to who gets that designation of being created in the image of God, no? Well, Precious Davis is with us tonight as a celebration of the beauty that can come from those who engage in honest struggle and conversation with the soul in the midst of even oppressive narratives that tell them they're not worthy. Ironically, the beauty that comes from souls such as Precious, who have found their worth, illumine not only their own path, but those of skeptics and cynics like us, who may not have even known we were looking for our soul. Precious is lauded both locally and nationally as an award-winning diversity professional, social justice facilitator, and performance artist. She's currently the Assistant Director of Diversity Recruitment Initiatives at Columbia College, Chicago, her alma mater from which she received a BA in liberal arts. I kept saying BFA. Why didn't you correct me? Precious currently implements and oversees the campus-wide diversity initiative and is the first woman of color to hold this position. And then I watched her today. She works it pretty good as far as selling her college. Precious served for 3 years as the youth outreach coordinator at the Midwest's largest LGBT community center, Center on Halstead. At the center, she coordinated youth programming surrounding HIV prevention, transgender advocacy, and LGBT leadership development among some of our most marginalized youth. Her testimony is that of a young woman who searched long and hard to unite body and soul. Through the appreciation of diverse, marginalized narratives in history and the retelling of such narratives, Precious locates herself and juxtaposes that which is complex in order to ultimately find the inner power within us all. We are very proud to claim her as a native Nebraskan, and she shares an alma mater with my son, Burke High School. I'm a Benson grad, so that's a little bit bittersweet, but we're very, very glad that she's a native Nebraskan and is willing to come home. She recently was awarded the prestigious 30 Under 30 Award from the Windy City Times and was included in the 2014 Trans 100 list. She recently opened for Grammy Award-winning artist Jennifer Hudson, curated the season opener Transmopolitan Transgender Resilient for Out at the Chicago History Museum, and recently met President Obama and the First Lady at the Emerging Leader Day at the White House. Precious recently married Myles Brady, and you may have seen Precious on Say Yes to the Dress. Myles is here this evening. It's been a true blessing to meet both of these people and simply enjoy the presence of this wonderful, loving couple. So please help me in welcoming Precious. Not with your thing on.
Thank you. Good evening. Welcome. I just want to say that it is just such an honor to be here. And I want to take a moment for us to stop collectively, together, and recognize that we are present here and that we have the right to do that. So can we just stop in silence for 30 seconds and just stop and be present here? We don't do that enough. We don't stop. I want to thank our Creator for the opportunity to be here and for my existence. I see Merlin Lemke in the crowd tonight, my former music teacher at Burke High School. That man is an inspiration. He changed my life, and it's an honor that you are present. I've been talking about you all weekend since I've been here, so it's so great. I see so many familiar faces. Thank you for being here. Thank you to this beautiful community at Countryside that's been so welcoming. To my husband, the love of my life, who's truly changed my life in so many ways. I, the extrovert, and him, the eternal introvert. It's truly been a great balance in my life. I stand before you today as a testament, a married transgender woman of color and a woman of faith. I am just one voice of many. I cannot claim to speak on behalf of the diverse communities that my identity represents, but I can only offer up my expertise and my story. Far too often, single members of any given community are propped up to serve as the token representation, for I do not want to bear that responsibility. My only responsibility and the subject of my remarks tonight is to the integrity of my authentic self. I do not want to address the access. I want to talk about opportunity that exists in this moment. I want to give credit to those who've come before and those who've made my story possible. As I stand here, I recognize this platform is a gift, a legacy given to us by the lives who were lived with audacious authenticity at a time when visibility more often than danger meant empowerment. Brave heroes like Bayard Rustin, out gay man and chief advisor to Martin Luther King Jr. Quentin Crisp, radical genderqueer who refused to be put in a box of acceptable male performance. Marsha P. Johnson, outspoken advocate who helped launch the modern LGBTQ rights movement as we know it. James Baldwin, writer and social critic who told us that class and race are inextricably connected. These figures and so many others, whether famous or unknown, modeled unimaginable resilience and steadfast commitment to their moral compass, guided by social justice and an unflinching promise to themselves, to their own genuine self-expression. Their bravery and boldness allowed for the present that we now inhabit. That I, a trans woman of color myself, can stand here in the house of the Lord and tell my story without fear. I'd like to remind us all that even amidst our forward strides, LGBTQ folks and other marginalized populations still face social setbacks, career roadblocks, misrepresentations, pervasive stereotypes, especially among Black trans women, and the ever-present threat of danger in our lives. At the same time, we are also witnessing police brutality against citizens in inner cities. We are also seeing excessive force used against indigenous people resisting the construction of an oil pipeline through native lands. I ask that we see that these issues are interconnected, that we call each other in rather than calling people out, that we strive together to make this world one that we envision, this possible collective dream for a peaceful collective future. Now, as a part of that process, I am choosing to share my personal narrative, again as a testament to the pursuit of truth and authenticity and self-love. I'm reminded that we all, time and time again, have this opportunity to take positive action in the world, that we must restore faith in our own perfect divinity, in our wholeness, and as the goodness of children of our loving Creator, in the great almighty mantra of self-care and empowerment. We have the power to say, I am, I am, I am. Now, growing up in Omaha, Nebraska, I had very little exposure to any aspect of LGBT culture and identity. Least of all was the T of the acronym. Transgender was not a term I had any sense of. I understood that I was different, but I had no language or context to make sense of how I felt. Through all of the suffering and challenges and opportunities for rebirth I faced during my childhood, adolescence, and later higher education, however, I did become intimately familiar with another word, transformation. The beautiful insight that would later help me through my journey through gender was the transformation that it is not just possible, it is inevitable. We are always changing, blossoming anew with each passing season. And I learned that it's up to each of us as individuals to take ownership and to guide that natural process, to look inwardly, to decide what external form will emerge from the cocoon that we all come from. By the age of 5, I was removed from my abusive mother and adopted by my grandparents under the name Nathaniel Paul Hobart Jr. I remember the feelings I had in the courtroom on the day I legally changed my name to Nathaniel Paul Davis. It was exciting. It felt right, but I also felt a deep sense of loss. I knew that in order for me to be adopted, I had to be given up, abandoned. My father had left my mother, and now my mother had left me, but I tried not to linger on that feeling. Instead, I looked to my future as a Davis. Even at that age, I began to understand the power that exists in a name. Names speak to identity. Names speak to origin. Until I left behind the last name Hobart and the suffix Jr., there was still a part of me that was connected to my birth father, even though I had never met him. Shortly after the adoption and the name change was finalized, I found out that my birth father had passed from a seizure due to a gunshot wound to the head. So in an instant, an entire piece of my identity was fully and permanently cut off from me. But again, I chose not to focus on what was missing. A loss doesn't necessarily have to make you less. I chose to embrace my rebirth into something new. Through what would be the first of many transitions, I was fully and completely a Davis. One of my first memories as a young Davis child was at school when I was in kindergarten. I was in the morning class and had left my book bag in a cubby in my classroom that day. I went back that afternoon to pick it up, escorted by my grandmother, who was white, and my grandfather, who was black. All the white kids at Hartman Elementary went to school in the morning, and the black children went to school in the afternoon. So when I arrived to pick up my backpack, I was met by a room full of brown faces staring at me like it was out of place, or unusual, or wrong in some way. I heard kids saying, "What are you doing with that white woman and a black man? Why are you here in the afternoon session?" I knew I was one of the only people of color who attended classes in the morning, and I knew that my grandparents wanted me in that session for a reason, but I never really knew why until this moment. Somehow, this was the first moment that I realized that I was not like the black kids and I was not like the white kids. And although I didn't have the word for what that was then, that day was the major establishing place in my understanding of race and my unique position as a biracial and transracial person. It was one of the first moments I truly felt profoundly different. I knew that I wasn't normal, which is a term I put in quotations now. But at that time, I thought I was weird. I was shorter than everybody else. I was left-handed. I had curly, nappy hair. I was adopted, and my family was poor. We lived in a rundown neighborhood where public housing was the norm. I remember sharing in a sort of communal understanding with all of the neighborhood kids that we lived in a different world, full below the level of the people who lived in the suburbs. Somehow, my grandparents always navigated the economic hardship of raising a household of 7 and kept our family afloat. It was the same struggle for every family on the block I lived on for the most part. One or both parents worked multiple jobs to put food on the table. This meant many homes with kids taking care of themselves after school while parents worked the night shift. I remember being resentful that I didn't have parents around when we came home from school and that dinner would be waiting for us. My 3 sisters, my brother, and I did our best to take care of ourselves and to occupy our time with games, bonding, and wreaking havoc around the neighborhood to deal with the fact that our parents really weren't present in our lives. When I was in 3rd grade, my sister started hanging around with twins who lived around the block from our house. Every week, the girls would pick up my sisters to go to church, and it was a few blocks away from where we lived. For months, the Shropshires would bring my sister to services, and eventually, I was fortunate enough to score an invitation too. Victory Church was my first exposure to the very different experience of what I considered to be a life of privilege. The pastor of the church at the time was white, and his beautiful wife would dance in front of the service in the most beautiful flowing dresses, always addressing the congregation with the utmost sensitivity and reverence. She often cried when speaking. I remember immediately identifying with her spirit and energy as she greeted members of the congregation. Her presence and leadership at functions in the church was always felt with her hugs, and I saw passion in her eyes. Not only was I enamored by the pastor's wife, but by the splendor of the facility. It had a full gym, a beautiful sanctuary, and a separate space for vending machines. Then there were the activities I could partake in while my grandparents weren't around. I was involved in Royal Rangers. It's a Christian take on Boy Scouts. I sang in the choir. I ministered in the drama group, volunteered weekly to clean up the church, and participated in bus outreach program that happened every Saturday, taught Sunday school, and even went on a trip to Mexico City. That church for me was the first time I'd experienced any of those precious feelings of belonging, togetherness. It was the first time I felt I had family, and I cherished every moment. I was finally building relationships with individuals who actually made me feel valued. I didn't feel important at home or school because of the abusive situations that happened in both places. Growing up, I was continually locked in my room for long periods of time, and always compared to my brother, the football player who was diagnosed with ADD. I never wanted to play any sport. I always wanted to be the cheerleader. I didn't want to run around outside. I wanted to put new dresses on all of the dolls. People at school would continually ask me if I was gay long before I knew what that even meant. I had my first sexual experience around the 8th grade with a boy from the neighborhood. We peed in the same bush together and we thought it was gay. However, kids. However, I wouldn't come to understand and identify with the term gay until my freshman year of high school, when I started and I met all of the people in the theater and music departments. I immediately joined the choir and auditioned for all of the musicals and finally found a context in which my full vibrancy and flamboyancy, my desire to be loud, to perform, to be presentational, were actually positive qualities that made me stand out in a good way. Rather, the tendencies that I had, I didn't need to tamp them down and conceal them. Even as the theater provided this outlet for my passion and a chance for glory, I was still having family difficulties at home. I still live with my grandfather, who took custody of me after a messy divorce with my grandmother. Then suddenly, the years of sexual abuse that had occurred in our home came into the open, and my siblings and I were removed from our home and separated. Later on, forgiving someone for sexually abusing me was to be one of the most liberating points of my life. Having the realization that I was not a victim, but a survivor. But around this same time, I started getting bolder and bolder with my gender play. I would leave my house in the morning in tennis shoes and change into high heels on the way. I would borrow the shoes from my grandfather's girlfriend. I became the first male-identified person in the history of the JROTC in the state of Nebraska to address to the military ball. At that time, no one would really say about how I was dressing except my grandfather. I wore Hot Topic clothing that consisted of pleather pants, glitter in my hair, and tiny skin-tight t-shirts from Gazooks. Anything that made me stand out in a crowd. Shortly after that, I became involved in a new youth group at Eagles Nest Worship Center, which invited me to go on a Pentecostal youth conference in Aurora, Illinois. I will never forget this moment in my entire life. The youth pastor called me up from the very back of the church in front of everyone. He screamed into my ears a fierce exorcism. I bind the foul spirit of homosexuality out of you. You are a man, not a woman. You are a man. May the spirit of homosexuality leave now. I later woke up on a kitchen floor with 4 women praying over my body. That would be the beginning of a process that went on to repeat itself again and again and again for 4 years. I became more and more involved at Eagles Nest Worship Center and tried tirelessly to throw myself into my faith as a man of God and trust that God would take this burden of sexuality and gender expression away from me. All the while, everyone else around me seemed to think that they knew what I was and how they could fix me. I found myself dwelling on the question, who do you say that I am? Authority figures in the church that I looked up to, friends who sincerely had my best interests at heart, surrogate parental figures whose approval I longed for, all flooded my mind with the perception of me. Their plans for me, their guidance, their advice, their suggestions about how I might become more exactly who I was supposed to be. But missing from all of those conversations, interventions, was my own voice, my own opinion. Not once did anyone ever ask me, who are you? Who do you want to be? Who do you say that you are? And so over time, my will was bent. I was conditioned to look around me for the answers, to look outward, to look away from myself, to seek external guidance, to ask again and again, who do you say that I am? Throughout those years, I would go to these camps and retreats every few months, and without fail, at some point, I would be singled out and instructed once again to beg and to seek God's forgiveness. It was embarrassing. It was painful, but it was also conflated in my mind with love and belonging. So I went along with it every time. And every time I would get swept away by the passion, the enthusiasm, the encouragement of all those trying so hard to save me at the end of every retreat. I would really felt like something shifted. I get back on the bus believing that this time I had finally been saved. I had finally changed for the better. But then I would get home, crawl into bed, and be alone with myself again at last. And almost instantly, I would realize it was still there. I still wanted to kiss cute guys and wear high heels. But God, I did fight it. I really fought it. I kept on fighting because I wanted so badly to be a part of a thing and to find my place in a church and to be a leader, to build community. I was mentored by several masculine figures in the church during that time. I followed their instructions and their constant corrections as they told me how to cut my hair, what shoes to wear, and even what wrist to wear my watch on. Then I started getting involved in a youth group. The youth pastor came to my school and told me this was a good place to step up in a leadership role. So I became the worship leader in the choir. I was thrilled because this involved so many of the things I loved: theater, singing, dancing, wielding a tambourine. And at the same time, though, I was also stepping into a new life behind the scenes. I started going to this underage gay club in downtown Omaha and doing a different kind of song and dance on the weekends. So even while I was navigating my way at church, I had also found a space and a community that did not treat me that I was almost a person. I found that I would be good if only certain things changed. Then a community upon my arrival celebrated me, rather than telling me, let us tell you who you should be. Through this accepting environment, however superficial, a part of me finally began to really feel that I didn't care who knew about this secret anymore, that it maybe wasn't something that I needed to pray away after all. Eventually, there was some controversy because some people from my high school started coming to my church and ratted me out for not being a man of God at school, where I was basically living out and proud and fabulous. I was interrogated and chastised and shamed yet again, and I just didn't have it this time in me to repent again. After so many years, I was finally so sick and tired of fighting, so I confirmed their suspicions. I was asked to turn in my tambourine and step down as worship leader. Shortly after that, I ended up going to live full-time with a family that eventually adopted me from my grandfather. They were my foster parents who happened to know me from church and took an active interest in my development and my safety as a young person. They insisted I switch to a school closer to their part of town, West Omaha, a predominantly white area. I was now living with a white family and going to school with mostly white kids. It was a new life, another start, a rebirth. I had somehow thought that being adopted and living with another family was going to be a grand solution. It ended up having its own challenges and problems, but it was a fresh start. It was this place that I cultivated a lot of my identity. I got back into music at theater at my new school, and hanging out with the people there became a space where I finally felt different aspects of myself start to unify. Some of those people are here tonight. I had opportunities to put on makeup or wear high-heel boots to concert choir and cast parties, and I was supposed to encourage my friends. I was loved and lifted for being an out-of-the-box character I was forced to suppress for so long. The safety and trust I had in them gave birth to the resilience and confidence that continues to serve me today. The expanding sphere of acceptance I was experiencing also opened a way for new insight regarding my faith and spirituality. Maybe even if the people at church couldn't or wouldn't accept me fully as I was, that didn't mean that God had an issue with who I was. I knew my journey toward reaching my perfect, divine alignment still involved those mornings singing, magnifying, and worshiping in the house of the Lord. So I continued attending church even after being reproached and demoted, finding a way to foster community in my theater and gay worlds while still making it to church every Sunday. It would teach me an early lesson about intersectionality, adaptability, and navigating diverse spaces. During high school, I went to a training retreat about social justice called Anytown, and I learned about all of the isms of oppression. This was huge for me because it was one of the very first times in my life that I had an aha moment, realizing that it was systematic oppression that was the problem, not me. I learned about ableism, faithism, genderism, heterosexism, so many isms. I realized how pervasive oppression really is and made a choice to not be a part of it anymore. I finally found a community which to discuss the things I was actually curious about and actually had the ability to coexist in the world. The experience I had there sustained me through high school and still means so much to me today. One of the people who mentored me there was a girl named Nikiru, who told me how special I was, how much worth I had, and how great my potential was in the work of social justice. I finally felt not just that my unique voice was acceptable, but that it had worth, power, that my story had value and people would listen. I realized the systematic oppression from members of my church was what had been unraveling my identity for so many years. I realized that so many systems are designed to perpetuate themselves through control, through censorship, through limiting alternate streams of thought and ways of being. I realized that I could no longer let institutions and systems control my life, and that my path had to be dictated only through seeking my own happiness and alignment. I later went back to the inclusivity retreat as a camp counselor and participated in running other programs, leading workshops, using my voice and my story to help others. From there, I learned very quickly that I wanted to dedicate my life to this cause, that I wanted to transmute my suffering and slow journey to self-love and to means of helping and empowering others to achieve happiness faster than the suffering that I had achieved earlier in life. By my senior year of high school, the pastor at my church gave me one last ultimatum to repent. This time I said, "Don't worry, I'm not coming back." I was not turning my back on God, but I had finally realized that God doesn't live in the church alone, and that no man, no pastor or mentor or saint holds the exclusive keys to access divine love. God is in all things. God is in community. God is in me. God is in us. And with that sure knowledge and confidence, I set out to determine a new independent life, free from the questioning, controlling opinions of millions of other voices. I was going to be successful on my own, to find my own voice, to listen to my own advice, leave everything I ever knew to begin my own journey. I went on to college at Iowa Western, where I was cast in a play in drag as the fairy nymph in A Midsummer Night's Dream. This was significant as it was a chance for me to explore my gender in a more legitimate sense, rather than just partially dressing up at a cast party or walking around the school in high heels. Looking back, it's funny that these strangers saw this in me before I did and paved a way for me to begin to recognize the woman within. I was still identifying as a gay man at that time. I didn't have a label for liking girl stuff. No one ever sat me down and explained what transgender ever meant. 1 year in Iowa was enough. And I decided to move back to Nebraska. I transferred to the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, which welcomed me with open arms. There was an LGBT group on campus with people identifying as queer, which I had never heard was a thing. I got in a fight the first week I heard someone say queer. I thought, that's a terrible word. But there were some very smart and progressive queers on the campus who took time to explain things to me. The movement to reclaim terms and to empower under a broader spectrum of identification beyond just gay and lesbian. At the gay bar downtown, I remember seeing a drag queen perform I'm Every Woman. It was one of the first times I was exposed to drag. I remember thinking, I can do that. That night, the MC announced a competition for first-time drag queens called Beauty and the Beast. Ron, you were there. My friends basically forced me to sign up, so I did. Let me tell you, the night of my debut, I certainly came bucking out the gate. I felt on fire. The glamour, the hair, the lights, the stage, and the beauty. Let me tell you, I fell in love with drag, and thus Precious Jewel was born. Through performing drag in Lincoln, I again had the experience of building community, of bringing people from my college to the gay club when they would probably have never stepped foot there in the first place. I was again finding intersectionality at every turn. I also took my first LGBT literature class, which introduced me to even more aspects of queer history and theory that I had totally been unaware of. I'd never learned anything about Stonewall or any part of the transgender community until I took this LGBT history class at 20 years old. It certainly sparked a trigger in me. I felt so strongly that I needed to be a part of creating spaces for queer people to live, to thrive, and to come together. After studying abroad in Paris and London, seeing all the art, cabaret performers in the nude on a main stage, Elphaba from the musical Wicked performed by a black woman, I had all this amazing liberal energy. I knew this other crazy world existed, and I had to go someplace bigger. I knew that I wanted to see more outside of Nebraska. So I left my full ride at UNL and moved and was accepted to Columbia College in Chicago. During my first week there, my advisor asked me what I wanted to do. I said, I want to perform at Chicago Gay Pride. The very next year, I was on a float in the Pride Parade and performing on the main stage. I continued to study queer history, queer theory, liberal education, and performance theory, all while being a full-time showgirl working in nightclubs, trying to establish myself as a solo entertainer on the Boys Town Strip. I was barely surviving. I wasn't eating, I wasn't grounded, and I wasn't balanced. I was naive, but I was passionate. And I knew that one way or another, by God, I was going to make something of myself. I had these grand designs of being the queen, being famous, being the most biggest and glamorous showgirl to grace the stage. Eventually, this reached a point of frenzy. After I graduated, I had the full freedom of summer to dive into nightlife, the sex, the drugs, the rock and roll. I became lost in the illusion and the fantasy of the world, and I literally started coming unhinged. I ended up realizing that I needed to take a break from the big city and come home. I needed to return to my origin. I did a series of photo shoots back in Nebraska with a close friend from high school, exploring connections between my identity and the land, challenging notions of what is natural and what is altered. At one point, I was literally rolling around in mud on the banks of the Platte River. I was like, I'm not a nature person, I don't like dirt, I don't even like bugs, and thinking about it now still grosses me out. But I needed to be challenged in that way for a reason. I needed to strip off all of the bangles and baubles of a drag queen, all the sequin gowns, all the huge wigs, in order to see the simple, honest truth that remained. When I looked through those photographs the next day, my jaw dropped. Gazing back at me, I saw myself in reality for the first time. No makeup, no glitter, vulnerable, bare. But the only word I could ascribe to the creature in those photos was beautiful. Here in her infinite mysteries, God was showing me that I didn't need to cover or enhance or change anything about myself to be beautiful. That I alone, naked, was perfect creation. This was another huge awakening moment in my journey toward divine alignment. Reborn and baptized in the river as something other than a gay man in drag, emerging as a queer creature of fluid gender and infinite possibility. After those photo shoots, after God held that mirror up to me so I could finally see myself with unconditional love, I no longer occupied my confused boy persona nor the over-the-top drag character. I was just me, a feminine but strong figure, a harlequin in sense, embodying so many worlds and identities simultaneously. I finally saw what I looked like when I was truly focused, when my energy was at peace, when I was connected internally and externally. After my time in Nebraska, I knew I was able to return home to Chicago with a brand new clarity and sense of purpose. I had released Precious Jewel, the drag queen, and had begun to discover Precious Davis. Precious Davis, the trans evangelist, the queer activist, and performance artist. I didn't have to wear a ball gown to be a woman. I could wear yoga pants like any other girl, confident in her identity. But I wasn't sure and when to take steps toward the transition towards womanhood. In my time as a showgirl working in the Boys Town Strip, I had seen so many trans and gender nonconforming youth on the street. Many of them were homeless youth of color. They would watch me run into my gigs and watch me perform from the window that faced the street. Many nights after my performances, I would go out and love on these young people. I would take pictures with them, I would hug them, and I would tell them that they were special. I remember the abandoned feeling I felt at a young age. I did not wish these young people to feel that, even as homeless LGBTQ youth. Soon thereafter, a racist, transphobic onslaught began occurring in Boys Town. It was a crusade by all of the gay white men to rid the streets of crime, which was blamed on the young people who partook in community-based services from the local LGBT resource center located in the neighborhood. I wanted to bring my social justice background to bear on the debate, so I attended the local town hall meeting. I was shocked and disgusted by the unparalleled racism, greed, and classism spewing from the mouth of white business owners. It was at that very moment that I knew it was time to use my power to build community and safe spaces more than just entertaining being a drag queen on the strip. I wanted to help these young people. I wanted to help this community. I applied and I got a job working at the center on Halstead. My first week on the job, I was still hesitant to fully present as my trans femme identity as Precious, wearing mostly boy clothes and natural hair. One day, one of the youth that came to our programming was a young teenage trans girl who was already a couple years into her transition. I was awed by her confidence. I marveled at her leadership. Once again, God was holding up a mirror up to me saying, in essence, just be yourself. I said to a coworker, I wish I could be sitting here as Precious, to which he responded, why can't you? And that was it. I realized I was the only one holding myself back from authenticity. That would be the very last time in my life that I ever questioned or hesitated about presenting my full, true self to the world. I realized this was my chance to finally be the woman I had looked up to be my life, my teachers, their lives, standing with the halls with that sharp click of authority and glamour, and heels and power skirts, and all the trappings of my femme identity. Finally, I had the chance to fully embody my identity as a trans woman of color. During my time while working at the Center on Halstead, I facilitated groups of trans and gay youth of color. I held discussions on identity, safe sex, healthy relationships, and many other relevant topics. It was perfect to parallel my leadership within the church, building community and camaraderie amongst a diverse flock. But this time, the congregation was queer youth. I coordinated community outreach to LGBT youth, organized HIV prevention efforts, and planned fabulous events for all of the young people to enjoy and mingle with one another. Since then, I've gone on to speak at conferences and university across the country, been included on the Windy City Times 30 Under 30 list, been included on the prestigious Trans 100 list, and 2 years ago transitioned to my new exciting role as the Assistant Director of Diversity Recruitment Initiatives at Columbia College Chicago. I truly feel like my journey has come full circle as I stand here as staff member of the college that educated me, that I get to talk about my life as a trans woman in a church in my hometown, and looking forward to a future full of even more beautiful transformations. Everything has led me to this moment, this chance to tell my story, as a vibrant reminder that no matter what hardships we face as individuals or as a community, we can be resilient and we can achieve anything. We must remind ourselves each day to recognize God's perfect design in our lives. As long as we are listening to all of the voices around us telling us how and who to be, as long as we are asking, who do you say that I am? We are not existing in divine alignment. We are not loving ourselves unconditionally and therefore cannot love others unconditionally. Only when we sink into that pocket, that perfect shaped space in the universe that each of us is made to occupy, can we truly recognize the Creator's perfect plan and know, indeed, that a perfect loving God does exist, that we are perfect just as we are, that we have nothing to fix about ourselves, that we are God within and above. We are the whole universe contained in one perfect creation. So many people will try to tell you who you are, but we have to turn away from these expectations, these prescriptions. Let others' perceptions and judgments have no bearing on your self-worth. Turn inward to see the Godhood inside of you, your unique light, your unique personhood. Faith is not based in authority. Faith is not based in obedience. Faith is based in love. And then, once we are sure in what that sense of self, only then are we able to turn outward to share the light blooming within us, not to tell or to instruct others, but to lead by example. To hold a mirror up to others so that they can see their beauty in turn. God does not always speak in a clear, resounding voice from the clouds. God speaks to each of us through all of us, through our communities, through our relationships, through our empowerment. We realize that God is the divine. We are created in His and her image in the sense that we are creators ourselves. We are the manifestors and the miracle makers of destiny. When we believe in the power of the miraculous that lives in us all, that we can grow infinitely, that each of us has a gift and an ability to serve, to spread acceptance, equality, and love. Touch the entire circumference of your influence. Reach out and share your inner light. And always continue seeking. Always continue seeking to be even more in perfect alignment with your truth. Be sincere. Be impeccable with your word. Be honest. Be open. Strive always for authenticity and integrity above all else. Trust yourself. Trust your inner voice. Trust your higher self. Trust your own guidance. For we are all born with profound intuition. We are all born with a predisposition to be good, to be noble, to be kind. Cherish and nurture that inside of you. Audre Lorde once said, "When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less about whether I am afraid." It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. Your silence will not protect you. If I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and be eaten alive. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. I am deliberate and afraid of nothing. When we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard and welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak. Revolution is not a one-time event. Our vision begins with our desires. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Love you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Please raise your hand so that we can come to you with a microphone, so if you have questions.
Before we do that, I see my grandmother in the back. Grandma, can you come sit in the front next to Myles? This is my grandmother. Can we applause for my grandmother? Thank you for being here. Hey, thank you for being here.
Thanks.
Questions?
Thank you for taking my question.
Yeah.
And I hope that I say this correctly. Years ago, there was a little boy in a Catholic school that wanted to dress as a little girl.
Yeah.
He was first told that that would be fine. The next year, when the school year started, he was told no. There is a lot of turmoil throughout the community and the school, things like that. My question to you is, we've often been told that God does not make mistakes. And I'm sure that you must have, or maybe I'm assuming here, thought about or have been asked the question, how do you answer that, knowing that you feel feminine within, that God doesn't make mistakes? Do you understand my question?
So your question to me, you're asking how do I rectify the fact that people say that God doesn't make mistakes?
Exactly.
But I think there's a notion in here. Okay, I got it. I got it. Okay.
Thank you.
So Kelly and I were talking about this at lunch. First of all, I want to say I talked a little bit about it in my keynote. First of all, I want to talk about, let's go back to when the Bible was translated and who was translating the Bible, right? When Constantine was translating the text, it was to control people. And at that time when the text was translated, there were not people of color written into the text. LGBT people are not written into the text. And so part of that is, part of my work is sharing our history. We have a great history that is erased. You know, the Bible talks about we perish without knowledge, right? So when we are erased, completely erased from the text, we need to go and find the narratives of great people in history. You know, when we look at Joan of Arc, you know, when we look at Marsha P. Johnson, you know, when we look at Bayard Rustin, when we look at Quentin Crisp, all of these great pioneers whose stories were not being told. So I think the narrative of control has really shaped, you know, in terms of how that affects LGBT communities. Like, I believe that I am loved and that this is God's creation. This is how I was intended to be created. When we look at the history of trans folks are actually medicine men. They are shaman. They're two-spirited folks. You know, and there are so many different cultures where trans people are revered as royalty. When we look at the Indian culture, we look at the Hidras. When Indian babies are born, they send a Hidra to come to bless the child. When you look at Amazon cultures, you look at the medicine men who are there to channel people through deliverance. So when you look at Native American two-spirited folks. These are people who are erased from the narrative. For me, this is all part of the divine, So it's about who is telling the story. When you erase people, when people don't see themselves. And so that's part of my work of sharing my story. And when we look at, I was telling Kelly today at lunch, it blows my mind. I never ever thought, you can ask my high school music teacher. Before I even had a term for what I would wear high heels, I would wear extravagant things. That's just who I was. And today, as a culture, we're having a mass conversation about transgender. We live in a time where we see Laverne Cox, an out and proud trans celebrity. There were none of those people in visibility when I was growing up. So I'd say it's about who is saying that God doesn't make mistakes and what is denotated as a mistake. Because I do not think that LGBTQ youth are a mistake. I think, no, I believe you. No, I hear you. No, I'm not saying that's what you were saying, but that is what is the prescribed notion, the stereotypes, surrounding people. That's why we see so many homeless LGBTQ youth, because of a belief that people believe that God doesn't love someone because they have a prescribed gender or sexuality that transcends the binary. I don't believe that. And so I think it's about finding the narrative that includes diverse people in history.
Can you hear me? This is not really a question. This
Yeah.
is a comment.
Yeah.
I was born in the 50s, transsexual. When I was 2 months shy of being 4, my world collapsed because I figured out, oh my God, I'm a boy. I'm always going to be a boy. And I was devastated. And I was raised in a violent mining town, so I learned to hide it well, or I thought it was well, although everybody seemed to recognize it and beat me up. But my whole life, I just, because I was raised in a fundamentalist Christian religion, I thought maybe it was, a sin, it was wrong, it was evil, the devil had a hold of me, whatever. And I'm sure you've been through all that.
Yeah.
But, so I remember paying a boy my lunch money every day so he could teach me how to walk like a boy. I was trying to not get beaten up every day. But when I turned 17, I began to develop breasts spontaneously. And by the time I was 19, I couldn't go to a public pool or take my shirt off when I mowed the lawn or anything. And at the time, to tell you how messed up your thinking is, I thought this was God's punishment for my unnatural desire. Many, many years later, when I was in my 40s, I decided, the hell with it. I'm gonna transition. I've had enough of it. And it was after I pulled the 9mm out of my mouth, I thought, well, let's see, transition or suicide? And so I decided to transition. And it was then that I found out, after seeing medical professionals, that I had an ovary. And so the next time somebody says God doesn't make mistakes, say, okay. I had a very close friend who was an Orthodox Jew. And when I decided to transition, she told me, she said, well, if you think you're supposed to be a woman, why did God make you a man? And I said, God didn't make me a man. God made me a transsexual. And to say God makes no mistakes, what about the kids that are born with birth defects? Or in my case, somebody who was intersexed. And I personally consider every transsexual intersexed, because when the body doesn't match the brain, it's okay to correct a cleft palate, or it's okay to, have surgery on a child with a deformed hand, but if your deformity is elsewhere, then society finds it immoral for us to correct it. I think that's unjust. So yeah, God doesn't make mistakes, but He makes a lot of diversity. So.
Thank you so much for sharing. I celebrate you. It's also really important to know that the average life expectancy of a trans woman in the United States is 32 years old. because of the systematic barriers and the violence, and without the access to resources, to comprehensive health care, trans women are literally dying. And also there's an epidemic of violence against trans women, specifically trans women of color. I'm gonna just call it straight out. There are lots of trans women who have to engage in survival sex work to survive because of the access, the withholding of resources regarding employment. And so it's important to know that trans women are being killed. You know, there are men who actively seek trans women and then sleep with them and then kill them. You know, this is an active problem in our community, so it's really important. Visibility is really important, of really being seen, and trans people in general knowing that we deserve to be seen and to be celebrated.
I have a nephew who recently came out as being trans, and she is beginning to change her name. She is in a real loving relationship with a woman they are now engaged. The aunts and uncles are very accepting, because we always wondered there's something there that, she just doesn't seem comfortable in being a man. All of the cousins are very supportive of her as she goes through this change in her life. What my question is how can we, as her family, what was the most important, and how can we support her? What can we do to support her and to support my brother and sister-in-law as they are struggling very, very much right now with this? What can we do, and what was the most important support that you got as you went through the transitioning to a woman?
Yeah, I would say love. Knowing that I was loved, although my family didn't understand. They didn't understand why they just thought I was dancing at that club down in Lincoln. That's what they just thought. What did you say, Grandma? You were a good dancer. Thank you. But it was love that I could always show up to my grandmother's house. It was love that I could come home to my parents, that I could be there, because so many LGBT youth are just kicked out, to be visible and to be seen and to be acknowledged. I think that really got me through. Also community. I had people around me who had done it. I had seen them thriving and surviving. I had lunch with Joni, right? Yes. I had lunch with Joni today. And Joni, you work with PFLAG, right? Yes. Joni works with PFLAG here in Omaha and does cultural competency trainings. Through attending stuff like that, through, in general, social justice and diversity, we should always be educating ourselves. It's a continuing conversation. So attending talks like this, on different kinds of topics, making themselves aware that trans is beautiful, that there is, and I go back to the history, that there is a history, and one of the things that ultimately surprised me, when I got engaged, I garnered so much media attention. It was not something that I expected to happen at all. And my husband is also trans. So I think that people were like, 2 trans people are getting married? That we are actually human beings, like we are humans who have human emotions, we have desires, for a future. We are both working professionals. We want to build a family. We are both very spiritual. So the only thing that changes is someone's identity, that it's just as a moving away from how they were identified at birth. Nothing changes. It doesn't have to be a huge, ta-da, what happened, to just exist and to love and to support. But I'd say also respect is really important. And something to know that as I stand here as a trans woman, I want to advocate that not all trans people have surgery. Not all trans people take hormones. Not all trans people want to identify as trans feminine or trans masculine. Some people are non-binary. They'd rather navigate a space in the middle. Some people prefer the term he, some people prefer she, some people prefer they, some people prefer z, and that there is no actual kind of way to be trans. That there is no one, like we are human beings. We are all very different and very diverse. So just kind of love and support. And also, I always encourage a counselor, someone who's culturally competent and working with LGBT communities who can just let them talk and see that this is a part of life and a part of who they are. This is Joni. She wears a PFLAG. No, I'm serious. I was having lunch with Joni today. I was like, you are woke. Like, woke is the term that I prescribe to people who are in the know about social justice and are always, kind of following how to always live their lives to serve diversity and to people. Yeah, Joni is awesome. Joni, will you connect with her after this?
And I'll introduce that other gal to Kate.
Okay, thanks. Hi.
Hi. Where have you gained so much strength from and so much encouragement from?
Ooh, that's a good question. Where do I gain strength? My husband. I gain a tremendous amount of strength. When Myles and I first started dating, I said I worked at that community center. This person pursued me, and I was like, nope, I'm into my job. And Myles pursued me for a full year, and I was so focused on my job. And social work, if anyone has ever done social work is a very demanding job. It's not one of those jobs that you can leave at 5 o'clock. And so I would go home and I would cry. I would sob, just because the horror stories I heard from the young people. And when Myles and I first started dating, I would literally sob as he would just hold me in our bed. I would just sob. And through that release, I feel like Myles' love has really liberated me as a person and really balanced me and gave me a sense of home, of being grounded. I find tremendous strength in performance. I love performance, whether it's Beyonce. No, seriously, I always go see Beyonce in concert because she's a force of nature. Like, it shows me what happens when someone is in tune to themselves. I like to go see opera singers. I like to go see choirs perform. Community. I love movements. Myles and I go to community events. Myles and I were just at the African Fest in Chicago, and I was like, this is amazing. There are so many Black people here. It's like moments of that I just draw strength from. I draw strength that I'm alive and that I made it, that I'm a survivor, and that I feel that God has had his hand on my life. And I have to always realize that God, if not, that God is the source and to what you prescribe to. But I believe in the divine. I believe that God throughout, let me tell you, when I went to Chicago, I went with 2 suitcases and $100 in my pocket, and I was like, I'm going to make this work. And I just feel like God seriously had his hand on my life. But yeah, I draw strength through performance. And when anyone is speaking their truth, that inspires me. Hi, Ron.
Hello, Precious. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. I just wanted to say, I have a comment, and then I do have a question,
Yeah.
so it's legitimate, I promise. Having been a part of your journey and being very, very fortunate to be a part of that, I am so proud of you right now.
Thank you.
I speak on behalf of plenty of all of our other friends that aren't here this evening. We are so proud of you.
Thank you.
And I remember many times having a conversation where we would never see ourselves in this role. And we can talk about, oh, it seems like years ago, but it wasn't. And that's why I find so much strength in what you do and you being the person that you are, because I've seen that journey. I know it's not perfect, but it's yours.
Thank
and
you.
I think that's amazing.
Thank you.
And I love that about you. And you inspire so many people. My question is, identifying as a gay man, obviously, we are often, okay, hey.
That was a read.
But anyways, identifying as a gay man, we are put often into, not necessarily the group, but we are affiliated with transgendered people as well as lesbians, as well as all queer, as well as questioning folks as well. How do you, where would be a resource for us as people who identify as gay men to actually educate ourselves on those other groups? Because oftentimes we're put in these groups and, we're that fountain of knowledge for family members, for friends, and where they ask us questions and we can rely on the stories and tales that we have from our friends and our loved ones, but we really don't have some of that knowledge.
Yeah. So here in Omaha, there's a group called Proud Horizons, and Proud Horizons host a safe space for LGBT youth to just be themselves, and to come and to have conversations. And I say it's so important, and I said at the beginning of my keynote, that I am one voice. Like, I am not the whole representation for the trans community, and I do not speak on behalf of the entire trans community. I don't do that. That's what they fought Caitlyn Jenner for. You know what I'm saying? And I'm just saying. But what I'm saying is, I feel it's important that you involve yourself in community, that you not just go to learn, that you go and surround yourself. You could go and volunteer, serve food to young people, just listen to them. Does PFLAG do that?
PFLAG is a great resource for that, and so is volunteering at Yes.
Can you tell them what the Yes House is?
So Youth Emergency Services, and it is a nonprofit. Youth Emergency Services is a local nonprofit, and they've been around for over 30 years and have, street outreach program and also transitional living. It is an amazing program. And the folks that run it will say that at least 40% of the youth that they serve, both in the center on a daily basis, drop-in basis, transitional living, and street outreach, identifies LGBTQ. So that's a great place to get more information, and a great place also to donate, because they are doing really, really good work with the most vulnerable of that population. Yes. And you can like them on Facebook, too.
This person has a quick. It's just important to be involved. I say to get involved, to get to know people's stories, not just by hearsay of what, there needs to be so many barriers broken down between the LGBTQIA community in general. Fun fact, does anyone know why the acronym is LGBT? Does anyone know? In the 90s, lesbian women felt like they were being excluded from the communities when they were actually extremely a part of Stonewall. The Lavender Menace, lesbians were a part of the modern LGBT civil rights movement, and they have been erased, right? Misogyny, the way misogyny works. So in the 90s, lesbians, because it used to be GLBT, right? Men often take center, mansplaining, right? Men often taking the center. And so in the 90s, a bunch of lesbian feminists said, we are actually going to take our rightful place in this movement. And so they switched the G and the L. So that's why now that it's LGBT instead of GLBT. Is that what it was? It was GLBT. So we have to break down the barriers even within that. There's bisexual erasure. Bisexual people are often erased. And it's only until now, It's 2016. We're talking about trans people. We're at the very end of that acronym. You know what I'm saying? Like, trans people have been pushed, like, to the end. So I think it's getting involved in community. There's so many, in the age of the internet, there are so many great content creators out there who are curating work. Janet Mock wrote a fabulous book called Redefining Realness. Laverne Cox is always producing something amazing. Teak Milan is a wonderful media strategist. GLAD is a wonderful organization doing work in media. GLISTEN is a wonderful organization doing work in education. Trans Tech Social Enterprises is an organization that does work with trans youth and technology. I could go on and on and on and on and on. There's so many different community organizations. There's also the National Transgender NCTE. National, there's so many. NCT, what is NCTE? Thank you. I know this. Mark Keesing is going to kill me when I see her again. So there are lots of resources out there that you can immerse yourself in. We have time for just...
One last question.
Oh, and let's do two. Let's do you, and let's do this person of color in the back.
Hi there. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
I'm a former teacher, and I'm currently working on a master's in social work.
Congratulations.
And I'm planning on going back and hopefully doing school social work. You spoke a lot about your journey throughout the educational system, and I'd like to hear some of your thoughts about not only promoting diversity, but celebration and acceptance. And I think especially with young children, it gets really complicated because you're trying to present topics that they may not totally understand, but how can we as educators and people that work in the school system make sure that we're not only supporting LGBT youth, but also other youth as well, and fostering
that's
empathy and kind of compassion.
Yeah, that's really great. So I think it's about, we talked about the isms, starting with ability, talking about in general that we all have different kinds of ability, the way that we navigate the world. In schools today, when they're talking about people of various abilities, they talk about students who are handicapped. Those students are not handicapped. They have a different kind of ability, and they navigate the world differently, and that should be celebrated. And we look at the way that we talk about illness, that illness is both seen. We don't talk about illness, that illness is seen and both unseen. We don't talk about that. Historically, how we're talking about faith. In general, schools only talk about Judeo-Christian concepts. That is, I'm going to call it's based on white, cis, heteronormative patriarchy, in the way that it's taught, the way that the Thanksgiving story. For heaven's sakes, what we're celebrating, we're celebrating the Pilgrims. No, we should not be celebrating that. We should be telling our kids the truth that actually that white people came in and stole Native Americans' land. That's what they did. They stole their land. And what does that do for children when they don't know their real history? This is Nebraska. Nebraska is an Indian tribe. All of Nebraska, practically, many of the cities, Omaha, the Omaha tribe, the Sioux, many of them are named after Native American cultures and communities that were here on this land. So I think through actually educating young people on the real history, bringing those stories, we have to talk about how whiteness actually affects, people of color. When we're talking about Martin Luther King, we don't often talk about Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin, who was Martin Luther King's chief advisor, he was an out gay man. When we're talking about the civil rights movement, they only talk about Rosa Parks. There are 15,000 other figures, who are still alive. John Lewis was there and still serves in Congress today, but we don't talk about that. This man is still serving in Congress, and he walked up Montgomery, but he will not be lauded until he dies, right? There's a legend living among us. Jesse Jackson walked with Martin Luther King. It's about bringing that history. into lessons. There's lots of really great books. There was a book that came out. Babe, what was that book about the duckling? Sissy Duckling. Oh my God, Joni, you're so amazing. I told you, Joni is so amazing. There was a book that came out. I love it. See, Joni is so woke. I told you. There's a children's book called Sissy Duckling that talks about being different and being unique. Jazz Jennings, she's a young transgender trans woman. Some people know her story. She was on 2020 when she was like 4, and they followed her entire story as a young trans girl, and she wrote a really great book. There's lots of different kind of tools out there. Just talking about diversity in general, talking about the Inuit, and celebrating their unique contributions to American history. Like, it's bringing that context. I think it's really important. I hope I answered your question. And then one last question. Yeah.
Hi, Eli. I'm a transgender woman of color, and
thank you for being here.
Thank you. And the YES program, they helped me get out of the life of prostitution, I guess. I guess my question would be like, how do we, or how do people save other trans people of youth in getting them on hormones properly, and like, how do we start by doing that?
Yeah. So thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
First off, I want to say that education is so important. This is what I tell young people in Chicago all the time at the college. Your education will speak for you when you are not in the room to speak for yourself. So it's important that young people, specifically trans youth especially being a person of color as well, that they finish high school, that they accurately seek comprehensive medical care. And I know that there are some challenges between rural and urban environments, in terms of accessing hormones and comprehensive health providers. One great thing in Chicago that we have, and then I'll bring it back to Omaha. One great thing in Chicago, my husband is the individual giving officer at Howard Brown Health Center. Howard Brown Health Center is the largest LGBT comprehensive LGBT service provider in Chicago. And I know that youth from around the Midwest come to Chicago and can be prescribed hormones. I know that their policy, that there aren't any ritualistic things of you have to go through a huge questioning with the therapist. If you say that you're trans and that you want hormones, you'll be given hormones because that's who you say that you are. And we have to remove those barriers. I think it's important to find community, find people who are like you. I think that educating youth about safe sex is important, ways so that young people don't contract STDs or HIV, right? Preventing that, because we see a high level of HIV in the trans community and the LGBT community in general, because there's a lack of education. And I think it has to come at an earlier age. This kind of goes back to your question. We should be talking about safe sex, in 4th grade, going beyond the human growth and development. Like, we should be talking about our bodies and protecting yourself and being healthy, being a healthy person. I think it comes back to this place to talk about health and wellness. I think health and wellness is physically, I think it's mentally, I think it's spiritually, I think it's tending to all of those kinds of needs. Joni, what do trans youth who want to transition in Omaha do?
There are some really good pediatricians that will help, and there is, now I'm drawing the blank, Gina Mora at the Med Center, who the trans folks have basically taken over her practice. She's a pediatrician, an OBGYN, sorry, and she had some trans folks come to her as patients and didn't know what to do, and so she went all over the country and got educated, and because it's such a tight-knit community with so few providers, they all went to her because she was safe and she was in the know. So I think some of that is places like PFLAG that have resource lists so that there are safe places both for pediatricians, OBGYNs, dentists, and certainly mental health professionals, and making sure that there's access that way. And One World is doing a good job of trying to get more and more educated as well, and that might help different socioeconomic folks too, because not everybody is going to have insurance and access to all the same care.
I think you guys are seeing what I meant at the beginning when I said I could just sit at her feet. I do know we have one more comment. Real quick.
I just wanted to say
Hi.
that, like, I loved you before this, and now I absolutely adore you.
Oh.
You are so incredibly articulate and beautiful and passionate, and like you are my sister from another mister, and I just absolutely adore you. So thank you for sharing your story, for doing what you do for our community out in the world. I really appreciate it.
Eli, thank you.
I knew that would be the comment to close this. So, Precious, thank you so much for being here, and Myles. I think the two of you together is just an amazing combination. I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. In your program, there is maybe in your program, but there's an evaluation card, and if you are not on our mailing list, on the flip side, there's a way to get on our email list to know of future events. But I'd invite you, just to the side is our coffee house. We have cookies and coffee and water, and I'd invite you to stick around and talk with each other. And thank you again so much for being here this evening. Thank you.